Today, I'm going to be speaking on what is truth. We've been talking about truth in the Bible study, how to recognize it, and it's very important for us to really recognize this one simple fact. Because if we cannot recognize what is truth, how do we know that what we're doing is correct? Now, Psalms 57:3 states, "He will send from heaven and save me. He reproaches him who tramples upon me. God will send forth His loving kindness and His truth." God does what He says He will do. He is the ultimate promise keeper that we can know. And that's why Moses can call God Emunah. And we studied what Emunah is a few weeks ago. Faithful. God is faithful. Oftentimes in today's society, questions such as what is truth seem to take on a life of their own, and we are often flooded by apparently contradictory answers to this simple question. Some people just say and do whatever feels right, and they consider that to be truth, because for them that is what they believe. Others say that we must look to legal rulings of our society, our individual governments, and they think that is truth. Still others say that the educational system provides us with truth. Christians, by and large, we teach that truth is that which is revealed by God, and some Christians even go so far as saying that this means just the Bible, and others claim that this means not just the Bible, but it also includes revelations from God. So we have a lot of variations of what truth is, even within what we consider the Christian movement. But with all these varieties to choose from, how are we supposed to determine what really is truth and what is not truth? Now, just for myself, as a general rule, I like to look for the answer to questions such as these within the meanings and the contexts of the words themselves that Jesus Himself used and believed. Why do we need to go to some church father to figure out what he believed about it? Why don't we just go to see what Jesus believed about truth? Because He's our ultimate person that should be the repository of all truth. Well, Jesus would know a lot of this stuff because He was a rabbi. He learned this from the time he was a little bitty. And He would have known that the same root in Hebrew for the word truth is also the same root for the word that we translate as faith. The same root. So the word for faith is Emunah, the same word that Moses can call God faithful. And the word for truth is Emet. So Emunah and Emet both have this same root in the language. So Jesus would know that there is some intimate connection between faith and truth. That's just the way Jews believe. So the word emet that we use for truth, it comes from this verb that is aman, that means to support or make firm. Something that supports what you believe. And we can see this concept in Judaism expressed in the image of the strong arms of a parent who support a helpless child. Okay? We need to visualize some of these words in ways we can understand. So, a truth is something that supports something and gives them arms to rely on. Truth stands firm in an active relationship to the one who is supposed to know it and carries the burden. Okay? So, between a child and a parent, there's an active relationship. And that child must depend upon that parent for support, or it will fall. Because the parent carries the burden of instructing that child. That parent is the foundation of our existence in creation. Now, the rabbis taught that the Hebrew word for truth, emet, begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the way that rabbis taught was very interesting. They would look at a word and then tell stories about the word to make it more memorable for the person. So that's one of their favorite little tools in teaching about God. So in this little world truth, we have an aleph, and a mem, and a tav, the three letters that make up this word. The aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mem is just about in the middle point of the Hebrew alphabet. And the tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So you can see how simple it was for the Jews to say the word truth encompasses the totality of God, from the aleph to the tav. All of God's truth lies within the alphabet in Judaism. He encompasses that which is the gamut of reality, because all of reality falls within the aleph and the tav. Now then, this is how we discover some interesting information that we would not have known, but Jesus would have known. The word for real in Judaism is amiti. It's also from this root. So for something to be real, it has to be substantiated. Now what's weird is the word for reality in Judaism is from a word that means that which is found out. So it has to be discovered. It doesn't just magically exist. So for us, we have to discover and find out what is the truth. We have to discover God. It just doesn't magically appear to us because we're inquisitive creatures. So those who seek truth are open to hearing the truth. So, where did we in society get confused about this concept of truth? Well, it comes from the world's dependency on looking at the biblical text in Greek, instead of looking at it within that which Jesus came. Okay? In the Greek or Western conception that almost all of your biblical translators used in viewing the text to create this theology of truth that we see in the world and in the church, they use the word truth in Greek, and that word is aletheia. Okay? This is an attribute of a linguistic state. Okay? And it's such that the truth has a corresponding link between our thinking as expressed today by our language and the state of the affairs of the world. Okay? Now then, while this is surely correct in that if we affirm something is true, it means that what we are describing through our language processes is true not only for ourselves, but for others who use the language. This is kind of confusing, but it's not necessarily a subjective interpretation here in Greek, but it's a means of communicating about reality. Okay? If I say E is equal to mc squared, you've probably all heard that equation of the atomic theory. Both you and I know that this is a reality. But in the Greek thinking, this particular truth would have some corresponding link with the state of affairs of the world. It's kind of confusing, right? How do you take a simple formula like E equals mc squared and then link it to some obscure concept of the state of affairs of the world? I can't do it, but that's what the Greek way of thinking wants to do. They want to try and link two differing concepts and say, well, they relate to each other. The classical Greek idea of truth is related to that which is factually correct. Okay? They deal with facts. True to a Greek would mean without a mistake. Okay? It's like the choices you have in an exam, true or false. You got one or two choices. Either one's a mistake or one's not. When the Greeks speak of the good, the true, and the beautiful, they're pontificating about their concepts. They convey the ideals that what is noble and virtuous, factual, accurate, and truly aesthetically pleasing. It's a world view. Much of this Greek thought is incorporated in the view of the world when they look at truth today. But it's not the biblical view of truth. In fact, if we just think of this idea of truth that the Greeks were using as factually correct, that's not the way the Bible looks at the word truth. So our whole theology is going to be distorted because of a mistake in looking at this word. Now the problem with this Greek conception of truth is it leads to metaphysical speculations about essences and universal truths and all of this stuff as something more real than our everyday world of particulars like cats and dogs and trees. It wants to speculate about the essence of the trees and the essence of the dogs, and it's very different than just saying this is a cat and this is a dog and this is a tree. They were created by God. So it's a different world. This belief was ultimately expressed in the Greek Platoism, or the world of Plato's thoughts, where appearance and reality are two different things. By only drawing an abstract conclusion, like we say, from the particular to the universal, can truth about ultimate reality be known. And we learned about that today. They reverse what is in order to call it truth. And you can't get there. In other words, this almost Gnostic or hidden special knowledge that could only be understood by special revelations led to the rise of man following other men who had some special ability to know the special reality of God. It's confusion. But think of Jim Jones. This is what this kind of thinking leads to. Man depends upon another man to reveal the truth of God to him, instead of coming directly to God and saying, "You are truth." But now that you're thoroughly confused by all of this Greek thinking, as you should be in trying to understand the warped minds that give rise to this drivel, Jesus' conception of truth had a completely different focus. Jesus focused on the dynamic, the changing, and the idea that truth was involved in the formation of the character of the person, and ultimately in the restoration of the world. That's truth. Truth is involved with you. And it's involved with you coming to know Christ in a special way. That is truth. When we look at truth in relationship to God, to whom we must all give an account for our actions, the nature of truth becomes grounded in the moments of decision encountered in one's life. Shall I steal? Shall I turn a blind eye to judicial and social injustices? Paul talked about that today. Just a simple act of voting for what we know to be true. That's a part of truth because it affects us as individuals. Let me tell you a story about how the Jews learned about truth. In Judaism, it is often taught that the seal of God is truth, that we're sealed with truth. Because the final letters of the three words that end the creation account, bara Elohim la'asot, meaning God created to do or to make. La'asot means to make something. These first three letters, or the first letters of each of these three words, spell emet, truth. So these three letters, and I think I've got that on your little chart. These three letters spell the word truth. So God created truth, or another word we might use is reality, to do or to make that which was taught that it's our responsibility as God creatures to complete the doing of His creation. Our business as believers is to continue God's creation upon the earth. Truth is about doing, not being. I mean, we just don't sit around and, well, some people might go, That is not truth. That is a lie. Because truth is about doing, not just sitting there being. Now, I said before, these concepts, such as truth, faith, hope, all of these are called verbal nouns in Hebrew. These concepts just don't exist in a vacuum. An action has to precede the existence of one of these concepts. That's a big change from the Greek concept of truth. It just kind of exists out here and floats around and finally finds a place to light. No, truth exists when we are out here doing what God wants us to do. It manifests through us as actions in His kingdom. Okay? Because it's substantiations of God's power and authority and His Word in our lives. If God's Word isn't, substantiated by what we're doing, is it truth? No, it becomes a lie. So we must understand that the truth or the seal of God is just not a matter of sincerity. It's a matter of being true in the sense that we are living it. We're being with it. We're a part of it. In other words, its existence becomes our existence. That's what I've been trying to explain to you, is that we exist in God's existence because therein lies truth. Truth for each and every one of us. We embody the truth, and we follow the truth in all of our ways. You remember Proverbs 3:6? In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. It's within this sense that we find that Jesus is the truth. Within Jesus, there's no disparity between who He exists as and what He says. There's no disparity. He exists as a fulfillment of both. Both He and His deeds are utterly trustworthy. If we cannot trust the words of God and the words of Jesus, then we become a lie. Because our being rests upon the firm foundation of Christ and God. Think faithful and entirely reliable. Think hope or salvation. Jesus is the living seal of God. The one who is fulfilling the creation by continually creating life anew within our hearts. His followers likewise should evidence this in their lives, among whom? The spiritually dead. And here we come back to the play between truth and death. Here is another way in this same word that we find the Jews playing with this concept of life. And Jesus would have known this. The word for truth again is emet. It has the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it indicates that truth encompasses all things and endures from the beginning to the end. But if you remove the first letter of that word, emet, what are you left with? The word means death. Moot. So if you're the aleph on the front of the word is also in Hebrew the abbreviation for the name of God, Yud He Vav He. And it's also the abbreviation for Elohim, the creative nature of God. So here you have the creative, covenantal aspect of God. If you put it with death, becomes something that is truth in reality, in a firm foundation. But if you remove God out of the equation, you are just left with death. That's it. When we, as God's creation, attempt to ignore or suppress the Creator in the understanding of truth, we can only end up with death. There is no other place to go. Jesus even told us in John 14:6 that I am the way, the truth, and the life. and no one comes to the Father apart from me. So if you want to deny His reality, then you really are in a state of what? Death. Spiritual death. Because there is no way to know the true meaning of life apart from this intimate experience and experiencing the person and glory of Jesus and learning to exist within His existence upon the earth. There is no way to do it. It's important for us to recognize the intimate connections between these concepts that I just mentioned. The way, the truth, the light, grace, and hope. This is a very common construction in Hebrew. And the words grace and truth, and we've talked about this before, this is considered an expression of a singular idea by two or more words, connected with an and. Grace and truth. The way and the truth and the life. What this means is that, say with grace and truth, the word grace is reinforced and repeated in the idea of truth. In Hebrew, grace is not something separate from or distinguished from truth. This is hard for us in the Western mind to understand. We want to categorize all these little words, have nice separate little definitions for each one, and say A is this, B is this. Hebrew is not like that. Grace and truth are basically the same idea expressed in different ways. It's like a diamond has different facets. If you turn it up on this way, this may be the grace facet. If you turn it over here, one of these facets may be the truth facet. One of these may be some other different facet. Hope, whatever. But it's the same diamond that you're looking at. It's a different way to look at the same thing. And this is critical for us to understand. For if I were to say that I'm a follower of the way, the truth, and the light, I'm not expressing three separate concepts. I'm expressing one concept with three words. My obligation to grace is not independent of or separated from truth. Truth is grace because truth that's not embodied within Christ is not truth at all. To be true is to be permanent, reliable, and steadfast. That's the root meaning of truth. God's grace is true. It's truth. And unless our expression of His covenantal character within us has these same characteristics, it is not true. And you mentioned that today. Grace must rule my life and y'all's lives, and we must act accordingly to the infinite debt that each of us owes to God, because we owe our existence to the one who has brought us into existence. We also owe a debt to others. We have to pay that debt forward. God tells us to love one another as He has loved us. So that means that if He forgave us, we have to go in turn forgive others. That's truth. Grace must rule our lives. Truth must rule our lives. Now let's look at the comparison now between this Greek and Hebrew concepts of truth and compare it to modern science and math. When a scientific theory that is generally accepted as truth is disproven, does it destroy science? No. It's actually a success because it's the means of the process of finding a particular scientific factoid, and it shows it's working. It's just demonstrating that the processes are true, that there's some substantiation there. And you have to understand that science and math are not a set of facts. We're taught that, oh, these are facts. Well, science and math aren't a set of facts. They're rather approaches to creating cumulative sets of working principles. Okay? We have an engineer back here somewhere. And he can tell you that these are principles that if we follow them, we'll get a certain result. However, only the biblical text is comprehensive and includes the spheres of ethics and theology. Neither math or science can tell you what to do with your life because they're devoid of ethical morality. Do you ever find any ethical morality in your study of engineering?
They didn't let us go to that part of the library.
Oh. Yeah, that part of the library is often off limits, isn't it? But that's the problem. We're looking for ethics and morality in scientific fields where it's not there. So there's a fundamental error. They are what they are. Math and science are just sets of facts that are what they are. The Bible actually reaches absolute conclusions, while all truths from science are relative. And we spoke about that this morning, about the relative morality. And the reason for that is that science and math rely upon what are called axioms. And axioms, in dealing with science and math, are unprovable rules, or also called the first principle accepted as true because it's self-evident or particularly useful, but it can't be verified. That doesn't seem right, but that's the definition of an axiom for science and math. Because truth for believers should be a personal and all-encompassing thing, and because God Himself is called the Spirit of Truth, the Ruach HaEmet, we should always find a place for it to be fashioned within our lives and the lives of those that we come in contact with. We create in others the Spirit of life as God flows through us. It's this transference of what God imbues us with to someone else by revealing that as we are able to share. Like you said with this guy Renee. It took a while, he opens up, and that life shines through us to him, and a change starts occurring because of God and His power. No place in the world is free from the Spirit of truth because it's all-encompassing. It's omnipresent. And it should be shining forth from us wherever we go. It's like the light. You don't hide it under a basket. What good is it under a basket? Unless you're looking for something under a basket. It's for this very reason that we find Pilate's question to Jesus, what is truth, to be a deception for most of the world. As with many people in the world today, Pilate was just a conventionalist. And truth was what he decided what truth was. He was a ruler. He could tell you what truth was, because I say it is. It's relative. What's true is what's true for me. But you see, here's the big error. The question is not what is truth, but what? The reality is, the question is, who is truth? That is the real question. Truth is not something that's objective and a static thing to be known and studied from a distance like the star Alpha Centauri. Yeah, we can see the star Alpha Centauri. We can tell you, well, it's up here in this position in the sky. That's not truth. Truth is a personable thing that we experience. It's right in our face, and we have a personal relationship with truth. When we understand this truth in a Hebraic concept, it changes everything that we think about, because it becomes a way of living, a mode of existence, and an inherently rational and relational process. This is the mistake that the world has made for thousands of years, as stated in John 3:19. And this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light. Real truth, biblical truth, is not about correct thinking. What is A is right, B is wrong, this kind of stuff. But real truth is about what is reliable. What is it that is firmly established, and what is it that is certain in the sense that it is utterly faithful? And that describes God. Utterly faithful. He never is non-faithful. And we must think of this Hebraic idea in its practical application and not in its typical Greek cognitive sense. That's our mistake. We're wanting to think of faith instead of experience faith. We want to think of truth and not experience truth. Truth is what I and you should be doing as a practical matter, not what we think about. You remember the statue, the thinker? He's over here, all been over and thinking. What good did it do to just sit here and think? I'll have to tell you that one of the funniest stories, just find it hysterical. I don't know if anybody in here watches Monty Python, but they had a funny little skit one time about the soccer match between the Greek philosophers and the German philosophers. And when the gun sounded, nobody could kick the ball until someone had an original thought. And all the Germans are going around, and all the Greeks are running around, exercising, and doing all their little stuff. The gun sounds, immediately all motion stops, and they all start thinking. And the Germans are pulling their beard, stressing, and doing all this stuff. And suddenly, you have a eureka moment, and Socrates has an original thought. And so the Greeks start playing, and they score a goal, and then the Germans are protesting. That is the way the world looks at truth. You got to sit here and think and contemplate. And it's within this contemplation that truth manifests. No, that is not it. Truth is not a static thing. People will say what they believe to be true, as philosophers do, but they don't do what they value. In Hebrew, truth is all about what we value. This is a mistake of the world in thinking that God is an object to be studied. not as a friend to be loved. Until we quit regarding God as little more than a machine, and many of you might have heard this weird Greek concept called deus ex machina. It means machine. God is a machine or a device that caused the universe to kind of get going, as the Greeks thought about. And we begin to consider God, the Lord God of Israel, Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh, our covenantal God, to be our own intensely personal, feeling, emotional, compassionate, angry, etc., living God with whom we have an intimate relationship. Until we start thinking of Him in those personal terms, we will never understand the biblical text or God or Jesus, because He's not some object to be studied. He's a person to be experienced. Jesus' words to us are not about theological facts or denominational dogmas. His words demonstrate for us the total reliability of His words and actions. They're about His claim to do exactly what God does and to always keep His promises. He's a manifestation of God's promises in the flesh. We can completely rely on what Jesus says, and there's no need to even have the slightest doubt or hesitation to do so. And if we simply accept His claim, Jesus' claim to be who He says He claimed to be, and that is Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh in the flesh, that's what we have to do. And that is our first step to becoming faithful, is accepting Jesus' claim to be who He says He is. Because if we can't accept Jesus' claim that He is God in the flesh, came to save all mankind, then we have totally rejected the truth of the entire text of the Bible and everything that it teaches us. We have to decide to trust Him, because truth is a condition that has to be proven by an action. And it's within that little small action where we accept what God has for us, His salvation and His wholeness and His truth manifested in our life, that truth becomes alive. Come on up if you want. We are reminded once more of the Hebraic character of Paul's declaration here. Faith comes by hearing. In order to experience Jesus as truth, it requires us to step out into a relationship with Him. But we must hear and we must obey in order to know. And if I wait for all the facts, all that whole line of facts, the totality of knowledge as we know it, that might be in some big supercomputer, if I have to wait to know all of these facts before I can accept the reality of God and Jesus, I will never understand truth. Because truth can only be understood within a personal relationship with Jesus. And by stopping there and just saying, I can't interact with Jesus until I know all the truth, what are we doing? We're actually missing out on the ultimate truth of all time. And that is, God wants us to exist with Him. This is our reality, is to exist within God's totality totality of who He is. And we can only do that by experiencing Jesus. Moses could not even look upon the face of God because Jesus wasn't there to live within him. We have that intermediary that we can exist within so we can experience God. And I don't want any of you to miss out. I know most of you here have a relationship with God. I don't know all of you. But if you don't, that's why we're here, is to help every person have that relationship with God. And it's not hard, it's just a matter of stepping out from where you're at in faith.